Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. This week's War Within beta build has definitely been a very unusual one, where a lot of the different class changes did happen, but mostly in the background, and not all of them were really brought front and center unless you're really good at reading data mine class changes. One of the classes that did get some love over the last few weeks has been the spec of Affliction Warlock, as well as some of those data mine changes, with some of their abilities increased by as much as 40, 50, and even 60% more damage, which you really do feel if you were to hop on an Affliction Warlock over in the beta and spec as a Hellcaller, which is a classic favorite, which I got to do as of recently. And it looks like every other Warlock did as well, as Blizzard found a way to absolutely break Destruction and Demonology, which could actually indicate that the class is actually heading into a bit of a rough direction with the expansion released in just a handful of weeks, especially when it comes to their options, when it comes to the hero spec abilities. So for today's video, I want to do a bit of a deeper dive at all the different Warlock changes that have happened this week specifically. As always, if you guys want to see more class videos like these or for the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So what has happened to the class of Warlock over the last few weeks? Well, this week specifically has been a very weird beta build. One that broke the class of Warlock with one of the hero specs, which is Diabolist, no longer functional for one reason or another, which normally is not a big problem because, you know, everybody has a, Hellcaller Destro is a viable option. The Soul Harvest Demonology is a playable option too, but I feel like them breaking Diabolist actually showcases that Warlocks might be walking into this expansion with quite a bit of a weakness. Diabolist is a very popular choice, and a powerful choice for that matter, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. However, I do think with Diabolist not being functional does show that Warlocks may be in a potentially maybe a bit of a trouble with expansion release in just a handful of weeks, but we'll get into that in just a bit. Over the last few weeks on the channel, we covered a little bit about Demonology, quite a bit about Destro, but we haven't talked about a spec of Affliction in a little bit. And Affliction actually was one of the few specs that got a couple of data mine changes, which weren't really like super visible. There wasn't like a proper blue post, though apparently parts of those changes did come in as part of the pre-patch blue post of some of the changes that are happening for live realms Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on your region, Wednesday being EU, Tuesday being NA. So, to kind of cumulatively combine everything that has happened to the class of Warlock, the Affliction specifically, which is like the only playable spec so far, the spec has seen actually quite a few single target damage increases and dot damage increases in particular, like a stable Affliction, not necessarily a new change, but a 45% damage buff does improve their single target damage. Dark Glare damage improved by 55%, so quite a bit extra oomph in that burst field of the Dark Glare being actually a little bit better as a burst cooldown, which is also pretty universal. You gotta maintain both of these available as much as you can throughout an encounter. Even abilities such as Soul Rod, which seems to be like a staple for either build, like they're really trying to make it centerpiece for, so no matter what kind of playstyle Affliction you really get to spec into, Soul Rod is part of every single playstyle. That one's got buffed up by 60%. I don't remember seeing that one in any of the beta blue posts. One of the changes that did happen is Agony. Agony data mining did end up making its way into the pre-patch blue post. Agony apparently buffed up by 40%, which does seem like kind of a recent change, but that is a pretty sizable increase, a 40% buff to a basic ability. It kind of just tells you like, Affliction Warlock probably was hurting for a little bit for a couple of weeks, hasn't it? And then also Malefic Rapture buffed up by 20% on top of it. So the spec has seen some significant improvements in a handful of abilities, but it's not like Affliction really needs a lot of abilities in order to get most of its damage out. You got your Corruption, which can be Wither, Malefic Rapture, your Agonies, your Yue, which is up for every single encounter, always part of your single trigger damage, and then your big burst ability. So like a good portion of your basic kit applies for all types of situations, single target, AoE, cleave, you name it. So Affliction has seen quite a few significant changes. Also, over the last few weeks, we've seen some other hero spec changes as well for the class of Warlock. Some of these we actually covered in the past, like Hellcaller, Wither being amped up by what looks like 15% baseline and the 35% on top of it for Affliction, which makes you think, whoa, hold on, Wither, the best ability that Affliction Warlocks have gotten, this Giga Dot, is getting amped even more. They did end up fixing up some of the talents, like for some reason, I think it was Sakrathar's Guile, but like Destruction Warlock version of this talent was still buffing the damage of Wither, even though you don't even have access to that ability as an Affliction Warlock, but it basically was double dipping. There was some of the other talents that were interacting with it in a funny way, so they ended up buffing it, but also removing some of those unnecessary interactions. Also, the defensive observer resilience got buffed up by 800%. The heal is very, very tiny. Dark Pact heals you for 88,000 health every 1 second, which is a nice number, but we are sitting on like millions and millions of health, so it's actually a very small number. But if it tells you like, oh, this got buffed up by 800% and they got an 88,000 value, what was the number prior to that? And yeah, it was really, really tiny. It was not really an ability. I mean, you don't really want to sacrifice of 10% of your health for more soul leech necessarily in some situations, so you kind of went Zevras, but it did no healing essentially. It was just kind of funny how little it healed for. Soul Harvester is another spec that's actually got buffed up quite a bit though. I actually got to test this on a little bit and test some of these changes. I believe we might have covered these a while ago, but just to give you a bit of a refresher, the Dot of Soul Anathema, essentially with Soul Harvester, whenever you generate a soul shard, there's a good chance it becomes a succulent soul shard, which allows you to use one of your soul spending abilities for Affliction being Soul, Malefic Rapture specifically. It kind of invokes the demon, causing that Malefic Rapture to do more damage, but also causing the demon to unleash itself, dealing shadow damage to the target. And also you could amplify this demon and force this demon to be procced through other methods as well. But the dot that it applies with Soul Anathema after the demon is unleashed got buffed up by 35%. This one is actually quite a significant portion of this hero spec's overall damage, the damage over time in particular. The actual main ability of Demonic Soul also got amped up by 35% on top of it. And finally, the Wicked Reaping ability, where for Affliction specifically, this is going to be playing around their Nightfall procs. Consuming Nightfall feeds the demonic entity within you, causing it to appear and deal shadow damage to your target. This one is slightly different for demonology. I believe it works off of, just so we are accurate when we're discussing this. And yeah, consuming demonic core feeds the demonic entity within you, causing it to appear and deal shadow damage to the target. So yeah, so this one of them plays around Nightfall procs, so you can play around Shadowbolt or Drain as Affliction. The other's about demonic core. Pretty passive, but there are some unique talents that Affliction in particular can pick up in order to play heavily into more of those Nightfall procs, and specifically Shadow Bolts. You can potentially get some decent damage out of it also. On top of it, the Demonic Soul ability will now be amped by the mastery of either Affliction, Warlock, or Demonology. So as you gain more mastery, the damage of itself actually grows with it, which is also really, really good to see. And actually this week we've seen quite a few Warlocks trying out Soul Harvester, since Affliction has been deemed quote-unquote as like the only viable spec. Not literally, but we'll get to that in a second when we talk about Diabolus. But with Affliction being quote-unquote the only viable option, more players started exploring Soul Harvester and Hellcaller, and I even got to watch some streams of players doing anywhere between 10 to 12 key level difficulty keys when it comes to playing out Affliction Warlock, trying out Soul Harvester, and the enthusiasm just is not quite there, at least when it comes to just the regular average rotational aspects. Hellcaller, I feel like, ends up really hitting that nice sweet spot of big dot damage, and Soul Harvester may sometimes even get decent damage here and there. A lot of Warlocks do end up defaulting to Hellcaller at the end of the day, even though apparently with some of the earlier sims, I don't even know how long these were, apparently Soul Harvester was ahead for Affliction in pure single target, but a lot of players still do prefer Hellcaller either way though. That being said, none of those numbers and sims are final by any measure, so please don't be quoting me specifically. It's just like a snapshot when it comes to one of the beta builds, and there's definitely going to be some more changes down the line. But after getting some time to actually play around with all these Affliction changes, it feels so good to return back to, oh my goodness, I've missed Warlock being this fun. And I don't know why I haven't played Affliction as regularly as I have. I've been trying to spend as much time on just about every single class, on rogues, on death knights, on mages, whatever is getting the most amount of changes. And I guess Affliction specifically, I ended up kind of skimping out on recently. But getting back to this thing, getting the stats right, actually going through and crafting a couple of pieces just to make sure that my stats a little bit more perfect. And after getting a few rounds in, I'm gotta say, my goodness, it's so fun. You really do feel the damage buffs, particularly in Agony as well as Malefic Rapture, but all of the other components I feel like do end up helping them out just numerically when it comes to single target. I mean, buffs to Dark Layer, buffs to your UA, and buffs to Soul Rot, they are there, but it's mostly a numbers thing than anything. But Agony is something you will feel in more sustained situations as well as burst situations. Malefic Rapture and getting those small burst windows, you will also feel it as well. And for Hellcaller now, you're not going to be completely, most of your damage profile isn't just going to be that withered dot dominating all of it. Malefic Rapture does end up being a significant portion of your damage, though you are still going to be a heavy damage over time wither Warlock for the most part. You're just seeing a higher uptick of Malefic Rapture, but I know that a lot of people are excited for Hellcaller Affliction in particular, just because it has more of a dot focus rather than a Malefic Rapture focused. But as I mentioned earlier this week, Affliction Warlock has been the quote-unquote the only viable Warlock that's been played over on the beta. That is definitely hyperbolic because Destruction and Demo are played. It's just they broke Diabolus, so you can't play it. You can't summon any demons, so it just has not been functional. But so many players as Destruction and Demo are so focused and prefer Diabolus in particular that it's just kind of sad to see that there's less Demo and Destro getting play overall, especially with the logs this week. But also we may actually be running into what I would say is a bit of a problem going forward. The whole point of the hero specs is for them to be to offer players a choice of how you may end up augmenting or changing the way that you play a class, like Demonology, Destruction, Affliction, but some of the hero specs of a Warlock just haven't really been getting nearly as much attention. And I'm hoping that maybe it's like a tuning thing, or maybe they could do like a slight adjustment over these next few weeks because the expansion is releasing rather soon. And out of all the different classes that I've been able to explore, I did notice with Warlocks in particular, we are starting to get into like a single-minded trend. Hellcaller, Affliction seems to be a very solid set in stone. Diabolus, Destro, Diabolus, Demo. I really would love to see some more love for Soul Harvester, Affliction, even though numerically right now it could do decent damage, at least in early numbers. Take this with a grain of salt. Lots of players do end up preferring the other one that isn't Soul Harvester as Affliction. They prefer the Hellcaller in most cases. And I would want to see something similar like that for Hellcaller, Destro, as well as Soul Harvester Demonology. I don't really know exactly what they could do to make it playable, but I kind of want to pass that one off to you guys in the comments. What do you think Blizz needs to do for both the Soul Harvester Demonology as well as the Hellcaller Destruction that would make you want to actually spec and play those? What would they need to do in particular, from the damage adjustment to some talents rework or any of the other changes or even thematic components? What will make you want to play those playstyles going forward? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. But with that being said, as always, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like. I would very much appreciate it. Join our Discord community. Link to that is in the description of every single one of these videos. I would love to see you guys join our community. And as always, let me know all your thoughts about Warlocks regarding the hero specs and what you think about Affliction, and which spec right now is the one that you most likely would main if you were to main a Warlock going forward. Let me know your thoughts, and thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.